The flash of a paparazzi bulb was a weapon. For Andrew Blackwood, it was a spotlight he craved. For his mistress, Clara, it was a trophy. They were arriving at the most exclusive event of the year, the DeWitt Charity Gala. Andrew, arrogant in his Tom Ford suit, paraded Clara on his arm, a blatant slap in the face, to the boring wife he'd left at home with a text message lie. He was here to show the world he'd arrived. But in the opulent ballroom, a world of old money and quiet power, a shock was waiting. The woman he'd dismissed was about to arrive not as his wife, but as the heiress to the entire hosting empire he was so desperate to impress. The interior of the Bugatti Chiron was a cocoon of hand-stitched leather and polished carbon fiber, a $3 million bubble separating Andrew Blackwood from the world he'd conquered, or more accurately, the world he was still desperately trying to infiltrate. "Turn here, driver. Pull right up to the velvet rope," Andrew snapped, not at the driver, but at the reflection of his own crisp white shirt in the window. He adjusted the lapels of his bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo jacket. It was perfect. He was perfect. Beside him, Clara Summers vibrated with an electric, almost feral energy. Her dress was a cascade of crimson sequins by a designer so new he was barely known, but so expensive it screamed, "I am here." It was also, Andrew noted with a private wince, cut far too low for an event this dynastic. "Oh my God, Andrew, look!" Clara breathed, her manicured fingers pressing against the bulletproof glass. "That's Page 6's live feed. They're filming everyone." "Of course they are, darling," Andrew said, his voice a low, self-satisfied purr. "This isn't your average fundraiser. This is the DeWitt Gala. Only billionaires and the people they tolerate are allowed in." He squeezed her bare thigh. "And tonight, you're with me." Clara turned to him, her eyes wide with a mixture of adoration and ambition. "And Ellie, are you sure she won't, you know?" Andrew scoffed, pulling out his phone. He glanced at the text message he'd sent an hour ago. To Ellie. "Server crisis at the office. Catastrophic failure. Going to be all night. Don't wait up." His wife. Ellie. Boring Ellie. The woman who wore cashmere beige and read art history books. The woman whose family money was comfortable, but in Andrew's opinion utterly wasted on her. She had no ambition, no fire. She preferred a quiet night at the local library's fundraiser to this. Tonight, she was a minor inconvenience, a problem solved with a 15-word text. "Ellie is handling a server crisis," he said, the lie tasting like fine wine. "She understands. Work comes first." "She's always working," Clara pouted, reapplying a layer of glossy red lipstick. "It's so unglamorous." "Exactly," Andrew agreed. He'd married Ellie Vance 8 years ago. She was sweet intelligent and came with a modest trust fund, the Vance inheritance, she'd called it. It was enough to help him launch his own tech-adjacent consulting firm, Blackwood Solutions. He'd built that, he told himself, with his own sweat. Ellie's money was just seed capital. He'd long since outgrown her. He was a shark, and she was a goldfish. And tonight, he was swimming with the other sharks. Bringing Clara was a calculated risk. It was a power move. It was a statement to the world and to himself that he was no longer the man who needed to marry comfortable. He was the man who took what he wanted. The Bugatti purred to a stop. A valet, his face a mask of professional indifference, opened Clara's door. The cold November air hit them, along with the deafening roar of shouting press and the blinding epileptic flash of 100 cameras. Mr. Blackwood Andrew, over here. Who's the date, Andrew? Clara raised her chin, her smile practiced from thousands of Instagram selfies. She took Andrew's offered arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. Mr. Blackwood, a reporter from Vanity Fair, called out her microphone, jabbing forward. A surprise to see you. We were expecting you with Mrs. Blackwood. Andrew's smile didn't flicker. He leaned into the microphone, his voice projecting confidence. My wife Ellie was unfortunately detained by a last-minute business emergency. She sends her deepest regrets. Allow me to introduce my brilliant colleague, Ms. Clara Summers. Colleague, the reporter repeated, her eyebrow arching in a way that told Andrew she knew exactly what was happening. That's right, Andrew said, steering Clara toward the massive oak doors of the Atherton DeWitt estate, the ancestral Long Island Gold Coast home of the DeWitt family. This gala, held only once every 5 years, was the single most difficult invitation to get in the Western Hemisphere. As they walked up the marble steps, Clara whispered, "They loved me. Did you see? They loved me." Andrew just smiled. "This is only the beginning, darling. Tonight we dine with gods." Inside the great hall was a masterpiece of Gilded Age architecture. The ceiling soared 60 feet, adorned with a genuine Tiepolo fresco. Priceless art, a Sargent here, a Degas. There lined the walls not as exhibits, but as simple decor. An orchestra played Mozart from a gilded mezzanine. Andrew was for a moment genuinely awestruck. This wasn't just money. This was power. This was the world of the DeWitts, the shadowy, absurdly wealthy family that owned a controlling interest in half the luxury hotels, private islands, and airlines on the planet. "I need champagne," Clara declared, spotting the towering pyramid of crystal flutes. "You get champagne," Andrew said, taking 2 glasses from a passing waiter. "I'm going to find Marcus Grant." Marcus Grant was the VC kingmaker. Andrew needed his Series B funding. He'd heard Grant was on the DeWitt Foundation's board, which is why this gala was the perfect hunting ground. "You go mingle," Clara said, already scanning the room for celebrities. Andrew nodded and plunged into the sea of bespoke gowns and quiet 7-figure handshakes. He saw a Rockefeller heir by the fireplace, a Dutch royal chatting with a tech CEO and Senator Miles. This was it. He clapped a fellow hedge funder on the back. "Bill, good to see you. Have you seen Marcus Grant?" "Andrew." Bill said, his eyes flicking to Clara, who was now taking a selfie back, arched in front of a Rembrandt. Bill's lip curled in faint disdain. "You came. With her. She's a new hire. Brilliant mind," Andrew lied smoothly. "Right." Bill looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Listen, Andrew, are you? Sure, this was the night to bring a new hire. What's that supposed to mean? It means," Bill said, lowering his voice, "that this isn't just a 40. This is the DeWitt's home. People here, they notice things, and frankly, everyone here adores Ellie." Andrew felt a flash of irritation. "Ellie is fine. She's at home. She hates these things." "Does she?" Bill said, looking past Andrew's shoulder. "Because she's usually the one who co-hosts the receiving line." Andrew froze. "What, with her father? You know, Charles DeWitt?" Andrew laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "What are you talking about? Ellie's father is Vance. He's a retired professor in Vermont." Bill just stared at him, his expression a mix of pity and astonishment. "Andrew, what is your wife's full name?" "Eleonora Vance. Ellie Vance." "No," Bill said, shaking his head. "Her name is Eleonora DeWitt Vance. Her mother was a Vance. Her father, well, he's the man who owns the air you're breathing." The blood drained from Andrew's face, leaving a cold, hollow void in his stomach. It was impossible. It was a joke. Ellie. His quiet, beige Ellie. A DeWitt. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Andrew," Bill said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I see my wife." Andrew stood, rooted to the spot, the champagne flute cold in his hand. The orchestra seemed to swell the laughter of the crowd, turning into a high-pitched mocking frequency. He looked across the room. Clara was now talking animatedly to a man he recognized as a gossip columnist for the New York Post. "Oh God," he whispered. He needed to find Clara. He needed to get them out. He started pushing through the crowd, a sudden desperate sweat prickling on his brow. He was halfway across the room when a sudden profound hush fell over the great hall. The music stopped. The chatter died. At the top of the grand staircase, a man appeared. He was in his late 60s with a lion's mane of silver hair, and a presence so commanding it seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. He wore a simple, perfect tuxedo, and his eyes, a piercing ice blue, scanned the crowd. This was Charles DeWitt, the patriarch, the king. The room held its collective breath. Charles smiled a thin, controlled expression and turned back to the top of the stairs, extending his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," a major domo announced, his voice booming, "Mr. Charles DeWitt, and introducing the chair of the DeWitt Foundation, Ms. Eleonora DeWitt." And down the staircase she came. She was not Ellie. The woman who descended the staircase was Eleonora. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet, a vintage Christian Dior from the 1950s that spoke of heritage, not trends. It was simple, unadorned, and yet on her it was more magnificent than any sequin. Her mousy brown hair, which she usually wore in a simple bun, was swept up in an elegant chignon, revealing the famous DeWitt jawline. Around her neck was a single flawless piece, the DeWitt Winter necklace, a cascade of diamonds and sapphires so famous it was rumored to have been a gift from a Russian czar. She moved with a grace and stillness that Andrew had never seen. This wasn't the woman who debated the price of organic kale at Whole Foods. This was a queen. Andrew felt the floor drop out from under him. His mind was a frantic scramble of denial and horrifying, sudden clarity. Ellie. DeWitt. The comfortable house in Connecticut. It was a cottage on the DeWitt estate. The modest trust fund. It wasn't modest, it was anonymous. Her job at the Art History Journal. She wasn't just a researcher. Her family owned the publishing house. Her family in Vermont. That was her mother's family, the quiet academic side she used as a shield. He had been married to the heiress of one of the world's largest private fortunes, and he had been bored. He had treated her like a stepping stone, and she had been the entire mountain. The crowd erupted in applause, not the polite clapping of a fundraiser, but the warm, genuine applause for a beloved figure. Eleonora, darling, you look divine. Welcome back, Miss DeWitt. She glided through the room, her hand on her father's arm. She greeted a senator with a warm, familiar smile. She kissed a duchess on both cheeks. She moved through this world not as a guest, but as the host. Andrew was paralyzed. He was a statue of ice in a Tom Ford suit. Then Clara, blissfully ignorant, and now slightly tipsy, bounded over to him. Andrew. Why did everyone stop talking? Who is that? Is she a royal? Her dress is so old. Clara, Andrew hissed, grabbing her arm. We need to leave. Now. What? Leave, I just got here. I haven't even tried the caviar. She yanked her arm back. Who is she anyway? She's... Andrew couldn't say it. But it was too late. Eleonora and her father were moving toward their section. They were greeting Marcus Grant, the VC. Marcus, who Andrew had been trying to hunt down all night, bowed his head slightly. "Eleonora, my dear," Marcus boomed, kissing her hand. "The new Children's Hospital wing thanks you. Your presentation to the board last week was masterful." "Thank you, Marcus," Eleonora's voice replied. It was the same soft voice, but now it held an authority Andrew had never heard. "The credit belongs to the team. Father, shall we?" They turned. And for the first time, Eleonora's eyes met Andrew's. There was no anger in her gaze, no tears, no betrayal. There was nothing. It was the cold, indifferent gaze of a person looking at a piece of furniture that was in the wrong room. Andrew's heart hammered against his ribs. "Ellie," he whispered. Eleonora's gaze flickered just for a second to the woman beside him. She took in Clara's crimson dress, her messy hair, her defiant, pouty stance. Then she looked back at Andrew. "Andrew," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the suddenly quiet space around them. "I received your text. A server crisis. How dreadful for you." Her eyes drifted to Clara. "It seems you found a replacement server." The insult was so subtle, so sharp, it took a moment to land. Clara, however, understood replacement. "Excuse me." Clara stepped forward, her champagne-fueled confidence turning into aggression. "Who do you think you are talking to him like that? He's with me tonight." Andrew grabbed Clara's arm. "Clara, shut up." "No." "Who is this? This antique?" Clara spat, gesturing at Eleonora's dress. Charles DeWitt, who had been watching this exchange with the detached interest of a biologist studying an insect, finally spoke. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a steel cable. "Young lady," he rumbled, "you are addressing Eleonora DeWitt Vance, my daughter, the chairwoman of this foundation, the host of this gala." He paused, letting the words hang in the air before delivering the killing blow. "And Mrs. Andrew Blackwood." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a black hole of sound. Clara's face, which had been flushed with booze and bravado, went a chalky, sickly white. Her jaw unhinged slightly. She turned to Andrew, her eyes wide with horrified comprehension. "Mrs.," she whispered. "Mrs. Blackwood. She's Ellie." Andrew couldn't speak. He was drowning. "Ellie," he finally managed, his voice cracking. "DeWitt. Your father is Charles DeWitt of DeWitt Hospitality." Eleonora looked at him, and for the first time a flicker of emotion crossed her face. "Pity. I always preferred my mother's name," she said softly. "Vance." It was quieter. She gave a tiny, sad shrug. You always said you hated that snobby billionaire world. I suppose I wanted to see if you meant it." She looked at Clara, then back at him. "It seems," she concluded, her voice turning to ice, "you just hated that you weren't in it." The great hall, moments before a sea of warm chatter, had become a tribunal. Every eye was locked on the tableau, the king, the heiress, the social climbing husband, and the scarlet mistress. Andrew felt the weight of 100 gazes, the collective judgment of the global elite. He saw the VCs he wanted to impress, the bankers he owed money to, the socialites whose approval he craved. And they all saw him. They saw his lie, his betrayal, his breathtaking stupidity, all wrapped up in a $20,000 tuxedo. Eleonora, please, he stammered, taking a step toward her. This is a misunderstanding. She's just a brilliant colleague. Eleonora finished for him, her voice dangerously quiet. A vital part of your team. Is that what you told the Vanity Fair reporter on the way in? Andrew. He froze. She'd known. She'd been watching. This wasn't a coincidence. It was an execution. Clara, realizing she was now the enemy, did the only thing she knew how she attacked. You lied to him, she shrieked, pointing a crimson-tipped finger at Eleonora. You trapped him. You pretended to be some nothing. He has needs. He's a brilliant man. He deserves better than some lying, dusty librarian. The room gasped. To insult Eleonora DeWitt, the woman who had single-handedly endowed the new Met Wing in her own home, was not just social suicide, it was nuclear. Charles DeWitt did not raise his voice. He simply lifted one silver eyebrow. Security. Two men who looked less like guards and more like former Special Forces operatives poured into black tie materialized from the periphery. They did not move toward Clara. They moved toward Andrew. No, wait, Andrew yelped, backing away. Ellie, tell them. This is a mistake. I'm your husband. A title. Eleonora said, her voice echoing in the cavernous silence. That is currently an active, and I assure you, irreversible revocation. She adjusted the diamond strap on her shoulder, a gesture so casual it was devastating. My legal team will be contacting yours in the morning, Andrew. I assume you're still using Mr. Henderson, the one whose office is above the dry cleaner in Stamford. A low titter ran through the crowd. The contrast was brutal. The DeWitt family, as everyone in the room knew, was represented by the white shoe firm of Cravath, Swain and Moore. A firm that didn't just win cases, it rewrote laws. They will be serving you with divorce papers, Eleonora continued, as well as a temporary restraining order, barring you from this estate and all other DeWitt properties. Furthermore, Charles DeWitt cut in, his patience clearly evaporated. Blackwood, you and your guest are trespassing. Your invitation, which you received only as a courtesy to my daughter, is hereby revoked. Trespassing, Andrew choked out. I'm your son-in-law. You some, Charles said, stepping forward, his 6'4" frame radiating pure menace, are a parasite, a man who took my daughter's kindness for weakness. You took her love, her support, and her name, the one she so generously kept from you, to give you the illusion of being your own man, and you desecrated it. You brought your filth into my home. He nodded to the guards. Please escort Mr. Blackwood and Ms. Summers from the premises. No, Clara suddenly screamed, a desperate, cornered animal sound. You can't, Andrew, do something. But Andrew was a broken man. His entire world, the one he'd built, the one he'd aspired to, had just been detonated. The two guards took Andrew firmly by each bicep. He didn't resist. He was utterly, completely, and publicly castrated. Please, he whispered, looking at Eleonora, his eyes pleading. Ellie, I love you. I made a mistake. Eleonora held his gaze. Her face was calm, her heart encased in the ice of the DeWitt sapphires. No, Andrew, you didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You've been making it for a year. I just finally decided to see it. She turned away from him. Father, Marcus, I believe we were discussing the arts education initiative. It was the final cut, the dismissal. He wasn't even worth her anger anymore. As the guards began to march the numb Andrew toward the entrance, a new problem arose. "Where are you taking us?" Clara demanded, as a third guard moved to intercept her. "The front door is this way." The head of security, a man with a discreet earpiece, shook his head. "No, madame. The front entrance is for guests. Mr. DeWitt requested you be shown the service exit." The humiliation was complete. The service exit. Clara began to sob a histrionic, ugly sound. Andrew just walked a hollow shell. As they were pushed through a discreet door behind a tapestry into a brightly lit steel and tile hallway, the last sound they heard from the great hall was the orchestra striking up again, this time with a jaunty Vivaldi. The party was resuming. The disturbance had been handled. But as they were shoved out a metal door into a cold, dark alleyway, they were met by a new horrifying sound. The rapid-fire click, click, click of cameras. The paparazzi, tipped off by DeWitt Security, Page 6 TMZ, and the Daily Mail were all waiting. The bright, blinding flashes illuminated their shame. Andrew, his face a mask of horror. Clara, her mascara running in black rivers down her face, her crimson dress now looking cheap and pathetic. "Andrew, is it true you're being sued?" Clara. "Did you know he was married, Mr. Blackwood? What's it like being thrown out of your wife's party?" Andrew Blackwood had wanted the spotlight. Now he was going to burn in it. Back inside the great hall, the Vivaldi was bright. The champagne was flowing, and the incident was already being filed away with practiced discretion as that dreadful Blackwood business. Eleonora stood by the fireplace, accepting a fresh glass of champagne from a waiter. Her hand was perfectly steady. Her closest friend, Sophia Arlington, a woman who was herself an heiress to a shipping fortune, glided up to her. Sophia, unlike the others, did not pretend it hadn't happened. "Ellie, darling," Sophia whispered, touching her arm. "Are you all right? That was, well, it was biblical." Eleonora took a small sip. She turned to her friend, and for the first time the mask of the DeWitt heiress cracked, and Ellie Vance looked out. Her eyes haunted. He texted me, Soph," she whispered, her voice trembling just slightly. "He said a server was down. He was so casual about it, as if I was a housekeeper he had to give an excuse to." "He's scum, Ellie. We always knew it." "No," Eleonora said, shaking her head, a deep, profound sadness settling on her. "I didn't. I refused to know. I thought I was protecting him." Sophia looked confused. "Protecting him from what?" This, Eleonora thought, was the part no one understood. This was the real-life story. "From this," Eleonora said, gesturing around the opulent hall. "From the name, from the money, from the weight of being a DeWitt." She turned to face the fire, the heat warming her face. "I met Andrew at a tiny gallery opening in Chelsea. He was electric, ambitious, funny, and so driven. He wasn't like the men I grew up with, the ones who had never worked a day in their lives, who just existed on their trust funds. He told me on our third date," she continued, her voice soft and nostalgic, "that he hated the snobby billionaire world. He said he was going to build his own empire with his own hands, and I fell for it. I fell for him, so I let him," she said. "I became Ellie Vance. I told him my mother's family left me a comfortable trust. I never lied, Sophia. I just omitted. I omitted the fact that DeWitt Hospitality was my family. I omitted that this estate wasn't just a place we visited, but my childhood home. I let him build his Blackwood Solutions in a small office in Stamford, even when I could have given him an entire floor on Park Avenue. "Why, Ellie?" Sophia asked, her voice gentle. "Why go through all that? Because I wanted to be loved," Eleonora whispered, and now a single hot tear traced a path down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. "I wanted to be loved by one person on this planet who didn't want my name. I wanted to be Ellie, the art historian who was a little boring, who packed his lunch, who he came home to. I wanted to be chosen for me." She let out a bitter, quiet laugh. And the great cosmic joke, the man who hated the billionaire world, was secretly desperately trying to become one. He wasn't building his own empire. He was just resentful that he didn't have mine. "When did you know?" Sophia asked. "About her 6 months ago. My head of security, Thomas, is very thorough. He brought me photos, Andrew and Clara, at a hotel in the city. The Plaza, one of our hotels." The irony was acidic. He used my own hotel with my own family discount to cheat on me. "And you did nothing." "What was I to do?" Eleonora asked. "Confront him? Have a normal fight?" He would have lied. He would have groveled. He would have promised to end it. But he would have resented me. He would have seen me as the ball and chain, the boring wife who caught him, and I couldn't be that. Not after everything. "So," she said, straightening her spine, the steel returning. "I waited. I let him think I was stupid. I let him become arrogant. I let him build his Blackwood Solutions using funds I later discovered he was misappropriating. From our joint accounts, he was funneling my Vance money to her, to fund her tacky designer wardrobe, to buy her that ridiculous sports car. The Gala, she finished, was his idea. He'd been begging me for an invitation for months. He said he needed to network with Marcus Grant. He had no idea Marcus is my godfather. He had no idea I was the chair. So 2 weeks ago I made the call. I approved his invitation. I knew. He would see it as his ultimate arrival. And I knew he'd want a trophy on his arm to prove it. He'd want her. You set this whole thing up." Sophia breathed her eyes wide with horrified respect. "The text, the reporters, the service entrance." Eleonora turned from the fire. Her eyes were no longer sad. They were the cold blue eyes of Charles DeWitt. "He wanted to be seen," Eleonora said. "He paraded his mistress at my family's gala. I simply provided the spotlight. He wanted to dine with the gods. He just forgot that in those old myths the gods are cruel. And I am a DeWitt." While the Vivaldi played, Andrew and Clara were experiencing a different kind of music. They were standing in the cold alley, the camera flashes having subsided, leaving them in the near-total darkness, listening to the distant sound of New York traffic. Clara was hyperventilating her sobs now, quiet, gasping hiccups. "My career, my life, it's over. They're going to call me a home wrecker." Andrew was silent. His mind was working furiously, trying to find an angle, a way out, a narrative. She lied. She trapped me. I'm the victim. "My phone," he mumbled, fumbling in his tuxedo pocket. "I need my phone." I'll call. I'll call. Who? Who could he call? His lawyer. The man above the dry cleaner. He was about to go up against Cravath, Swain, and Moore. He pulled out his phone. The screen was black. He pressed the power button. Nothing. It's dead, he said, his voice numb. No, came a voice from the shadows. Andrew and Clara both jumped. The head of security, Thomas, stepped out from the doorway. He was holding a small silver tray. On it was Andrew's phone. "This is your phone, Mr. Blackwood," Thomas said, his voice polite. "The device in your pocket is a dummy. We swapped it when you were being escorted." Andrew looked at his phone on the tray. "What? Why?" "Precautionary," Thomas said. "We've had our IT department perform a full data sweep and security wipe. All proprietary DeWitt data contacts and location information from your time with Mrs. Blackwood have been sanitized. Standard procedure." Andrew's blood ran cold. Sanitized. His contacts, his files, his everything. "You can't do that," Clara shrieked. "We can, madam." It was a condition of him being allowed on the DeWitt family network, which he signed 8 years ago. "You'll find his phone now only has his factory-installed applications." Thomas smiled a thin reptilian gesture. "You're free to go." He placed the phone in Andrew's hand and retreated into the estate, the metal door clicking shut with the finality of a bank vault. Andrew stared at the now useless brick in his hand. He was quite literally disconnected. "Andrew, call an Uber," Clara demanded, rubbing her bare arms. "I'm freezing. My phone is in your car, the Bugatti." "The Bugatti," Andrew whispered. He started walking, stumbling out of the alley onto the main road. The long circular driveway of the estate was lit like a landing strip. He could see the valet station. He could see the Bugatti parked right at the front. "There it is," Clara said, her voice full of relief. "Thank God. At least we can leave in style." Andrew marched toward the valet stand, his false confidence returning. "My car," he barked at the head valet. "The Bugatti, now." The valet, a man in a crisp red jacket, didn't move. He simply looked at a list on his clipboard. "Name, sir? Blackwood. Andrew Blackwood." The valet ran his finger down the list. "Ah, yes. Mr. Blackwood. The Bugatti Chiron, correct." "Yes, finally." "I'm afraid I cannot release that car to you, sir," the valet said, his tone utterly flat. "What, it's my car?" "I have the key." Andrew fumbled in his pocket. The key was gone. "Thomas." "The vehicle," the valet continued reading from a script, "was found to have been purchased using a line of credit collateralized by the Vance Blackwood joint marital account. As that account is now frozen pending legal action, the vehicle is considered a disputed asset." Andrew's world tilted. "Frozen? You can't freeze my accounts, my company. My payroll is tied to that." "As of 9:15 p.m., the valet said, checking his watch, "all Blackwood Solutions accounts, which were co-signed by E. Vance, have been suspended pending a full forensic audit by the firm of Deloitte on behalf of DeWitt Holdings." This was the financial guillotine. She hadn't just thrown him out. She hadn't just divorced him. She had eviscerated him. She hadn't just cut him off. She had reached back in time and erased his success. Blackwood Solutions wasn't his. It was hers. The seed money, the lines of credit, the co-signatures he thought were a wifely formality. They were leashes, and he had just run to the end of all of them. My company," he whispered, the reality crashing in. He wasn't just broke. He was in ruin. He would be sued by his employees, for missed payroll by his landlord, for rent by his clients, for non-performance. "Sir," the valet said, "if you are unable to procure your own transportation, the service road is a 1-mile walk. You can call a taxi from there." "A taxi?" Clara's voice was a hysterical squeak. "A taxi." Andrew Blackwood, the man who had arrived in a $3 million supercar, turned from the valet. He saw the long, dark service road. He saw Clara shivering in her ridiculous crimson dress. He saw the complete and total end of his entire life. He began to walk. "Andrew!" Clara screamed. "Andrew, don't you dare leave me!" But he didn't look back. He just walked into the darkness, a ghost in a Tom Ford suit. His brilliant mind finally utterly comprehending the truth, he had been a fool. He hadn't been a shark. He had been a remora feeding off a whale, and he had just been scraped off against the rocks. The gala continued a perfect symphony of power and philanthropy. From the dais, Eleonora, standing next to her father, was about to make the keynote address. "And now," Charles DeWitt boomed, his good humor restored, "it is my distinct honor to cede the floor. Tonight we are not just celebrating. We are launching the new $500 million DeWitt Legacy Initiative for Global Arts Education, and the new CEO and chairwoman of that initiative, my daughter, Eleonora DeWitt." A warm spotlight hit Eleonora. She stepped up to the podium not as a scorned wife, but as a CEO. She was magnificent. She gave a powerful, passionate speech about the right of every child to access art, about the need for integrity in patronage, and about building a legacy of cultural preservation. She was fluent, brilliant, and compelling. Not a single word was wasted. Not a single note was false. As the room erupted in a standing ovation, Marcus Grant, the VC kingmaker, leaned over to Charles DeWitt. "She's more than ready, Charles," Marcus said, clapping. "She's a damn sight smarter than both of us." "She always has been," Charles replied, pride radiating from him. "She just needed to finish her experiment." "Speaking of which," Marcus said, his tone shifting to business, "the Blackwood matter. It's not just personal, is it?" Charles's smile thinned. "No, it's not. The audit from Deloitte came back this afternoon. And worse than we thought." Charles said, his voice low and cold. He wasn't just funneling money to his mistress. He was stealing. "Stealing?" Marcus was shocked. He was using Blackwood Solutions as a front. He was taking proprietary data, internal DeWitt logistics network, vulnerabilities, high-profile guest itineraries, and he was selling it. He was selling our security, Marcus, to a competitor based in Dubai. Marcus Grant went pale. "My God." "Charles, that's not just divorce. That's treason." "Corporate espionage," Charles corrected. "And it's been handled. The moment Thomas pulled him off the floor, our teams were already in his Stamford office. The competitor's CEO has already received a courtesy call from our legal team in Geneva. The deal is dead. The data is secured. And Blackwood, he," Charles said with a grim finality, "will be arrested by federal agents before he even makes it to his apartment. The U.S. Attorney's Office, which, as you know, is a great friend of the Foundation, is very interested in his wire fraud charges." Marcus Grant looked at the patriarch, then at Eleanora, who was now laughing, surrounded by well-wishers. Andrew Blackwood hadn't just been thrown out of a party. He hadn't just lost his wife and his money. He had been the target of a perfectly coordinated, multi-pronged corporate and legal takedown. He had tried to play a game of checkers against two grandmasters of chess. "A word of advice, Charles," Marcus said, adjusting his bow tie. "Oh, that young woman, Ms. Summers." "What about her?" Charles asked, annoyed. "She was also, according to our files, on Blackwood's payroll, listed as a consultant. She was receiving payments from the same misappropriated funds. She's complicit." Charles DeWitt considered this. He watched Clara, who had, after Andrew abandoned her, been found weeping on the service road by a New York Post photographer who conveniently gave her a ride. "You're right, Marcus," Charles said, signaling to Thomas, his head of security. Thomas appeared at his elbow. "Sir, the young lady, Ms. Summers, it appears she was an active participant in Mr. Blackwood's fraud. Please have our legal team add her as a co-conspirator to the civil suit, and alert her employer. She's a social media influencer, sir. She doesn't have an employer." "Oh," Charles said. "Then alert her sponsors. I believe Chanel and Dior have a zero-tolerance policy for, what did the Post call her, a Gala-crashing home-wrecker, see to it." "Yes, sir." Thomas melted back into the shadows. The DeWitt Hospitality Group was at its heart a family business, and they protected their family. The gala wound down around 2 a.m. The last of the duchesses and CEOs had been driven away in their Bentleys and Maybachs. The great hall was quiet. The orchestra gone, the only sound the distant hum of the cleaning crews. Eleanora was on the terrace, a cashmere wrap pulled around her shoulders, looking out over the perfectly maniciled grounds, the dark ocean visible in the distance. The air was cold and clean. "Your mother would be so proud, Eleanora." She turned. Her father was standing in the doorway, holding 2 small glasses of brandy. He handed one to her. "She would have hated the scene, father," Eleanora said, a small, weary smile on her face. "But she would have loved the speech." "She would have loved the result," Charles corrected. "You took a cancer, and you cut it out. Cleanly." They stood in silence for a moment, a comfortable, familiar quiet. "Thomas tells me Andrew was arrested," Eleanora said, her voice neutral. It wasn't a question. "Yes, at the gate. He was attempting to climb it, apparently, after the taxi refused to take him without payment." Charles sighed. A pathetic end. "He wasn't a bad man, father," Eleanora said, swirling the brandy. "Not at first. He was just weak, and the world, our world, is not kind to weakness." "It's not," Charles agreed. "It's not kind to arrogance either. He had you. He had the love of the finest woman I've ever known, and he traded it for sequins." Eleanora took a sip. The liquid burned a warm path to her stomach. "He didn't trade it. He just couldn't see it. He was so blinded by what he thought he wanted, he never bothered to look at what he had." A car door slammed in the driveway. A young, sharply dressed woman from Eleanora's legal team approached. "Ma'am, Mr. DeWitt," she said, her voice crisp. "Sorry to interrupt. The papers are ready for your signature." "All of them?" Eleanora asked. "Yes, ma'am. The divorce petition, the asset forfeiture, the civil fraud suit." And the other matter. The lawyer held up a pen. Eleonora looked at the document on top. It was a simple form. She was signing to have Blackwood Solutions formally dissolved its assets, absorbed by DeWitt Holdings, to cover the fraudulent losses. She took the pen, and with a firm, steady hand, Eleonora DeWitt Vance signed her name, erasing the last 8 years of her life and the last traces of Andrew Blackwood with a single stroke of ink. "It's done," she said, handing the pen back. "Very good, ma'am." The lawyer nodded. "And Ms. Summers's sponsors have all been apprised. Her Instagram account appears to have been deactivated." "Thank you, Jessica. That will be all." The lawyer disappeared. Eleonora turned back to the ocean. The first pale hint of dawn was touching the horizon. A new day. "So," her father said, chairwoman of the DeWitt Legacy Initiative, CEO. "What now, Eleonora?" Eleonora smiled a real, genuine smile. It was the first one of the night. "Now," she said, draining her glass, "I get to work. I have a $500 million foundation to run." She looped her arm through her father's, and they walked back inside the darkness of the night, giving way to the morning, leaving the ghosts of the past behind them on the cold terrace. The fallout from the DeWitt Gala was not a loud explosion. It was a quiet, suffocating avalanche. The world of the truly powerful does not operate with the messy histrionics of a public brawl. It moves with the silent tectonic plate-shifting force of legal teams and back-channel phone calls. 6 months later, the New York Times Style section ran a glowing full-page feature. The headline set against a magnificent portrait of Eleonora was "The DeWitt Midas Touch, How Eleonora DeWitt is Revolutionizing American Philanthropy." The article was a masterwork of public relations painting. Eleonora not as a victim of a sordid scandal, but as a long overdue leader stepping into her rightful role. It featured a photo of her in a hard hat, her brow furrowed in concentration as she reviewed blueprints for a new children's arts center in the Bronx, funded by her new $500 million legacy initiative. It showed her at a podium at the UN, addressing a global panel on cultural preservation, her speech quoted for its sharp, unsentimental brilliance. The article chronicled her stunning success, how she had, with a series of shrewd ethical investments, already tripled the initiative's endowment. The name Andrew Blackwood was never mentioned. He was, as far as the Times was concerned, a typographical error that had been corrected and deleted. Eleonora, now universally known as Miss DeWitt, sat in her new office. It was a stark contrast to the Gilded Age opulence of the Long Island estate. This was a sleek, glass-walled corner office in a modern skyscraper high above Central Park. It was the office of a CEO, not an heiress. Her friend Sophia Arlington sat across from her sipping an espresso. "So," Sophia said, placing her cup down, "I heard from my cousin at the Justice Department. Andrew Blackwood's appeal was forcefully denied, is the term he used." Eleonora didn't look up from the grant proposal she was signing. "That's correct. It was. He sent me a letter last week." Sophia sat bolt upright. "He... what? From prison?" "They let him do that." "What did it say?" "Oh, the usual," Eleonora said, her voice laced with a clinical boredom. She finally looked up, her eyes clear and cold as the winter sky outside. "It was 20 pages. He's very prolific now that he has the time. It was a long, rambling treatise on how I had wronged him. He cannot be serious." "Oh, completely," Eleonora said. "He's the victim, you see. I trapped him by hiding my wealth. I made him desperate by not being the exciting, supportive partner he needed. He said he was tested, as if I were some sort of biblical-level temptation, and that he only failed because I had set him up to do so. She leaned forward, and for a moment, the CEO's mask slipped, revealing the woman who had studied her opponent so perfectly. His arrogance is pathological. He genuinely believes that his affair, his theft, his espionage, was all just a reaction to me. He still thinks he's the main character in the story. "And what did you do with the letter?" Sophia asked. "I gave it to our legal team," Eleonora said, picking up her pen again. "It's a violation of his restraining order. It might add another 6 months to his sentence. I don't know." She signed her name with a flourish. "I don't really care." Andrew's end had been as pathetic as his rise had been fraudulent. His trial was a 2-day affair. He had insisted on using his original lawyer, the man from Stamford, who was completely and totally dismembered by the DeWitt's legal team from Cravath, Swain, and Moore. While the corporate espionage in Dubai was quietly and permanently buried, the DeWitts preferred not to air their vulnerabilities. Andrew was convicted on the more mundane and somehow more humiliating charges of wire fraud and grand larceny. The New York Post ran a picture of him being led away in handcuffs, his $20,000 Gala tuxedo having been replaced by an ill-fitting off-the-rack suit. He was sentenced to 8 to 10 years in a medium-security federal prison. The brilliant mind of Andrew Blackwood was now assigned to the prison library, not as a patron, but as the man who mopped the floors and reshelved the books, a bitter parody of his boring wife. And then there was Clara. Clara, in many ways, suffered the most real-life fate. She was not jailed. On Eleonora's quiet instruction, the DeWitts dropped her as a co-conspirator from the civil suit. "She's irrelevant," Eleonora had told her lawyers. "She was a symptom, not the disease. Don't make her a martyr." But the world Clara lived, in the digital ephemeral world of influence and appearances, has its own death penalty. The night of the gala, as she was being driven away by the Post photographer, her sponsors had been apprised of the situation. By the time she got to her apartment, emails from Chanel Dior and a half-dozen skincare brands were waiting. All cited a breach of morals clause. Her contracts were terminated. The next morning, when she tried to log into her Instagram to tell her side of the story, she found a blank screen. Her account, with its 2 million followers, had been deactivated for fraudulent activity and violation of terms of service. She had been, in effect, digitally executed. She became a pariah. The clubs that once paid her to appear now had her on a banned list. The friends she brunched with daily no-showed their texts going unanswered. The last anyone saw of her, a gossip blogger snapped a blurry photo. Clara Summers was working at a premium sunglasses kiosk in the Menlo Park Mall in New Jersey. She was wearing a cheap polyester uniform. Her once famous crimson nails were now a chipped, grown-out acrylic set, and she was arguing with a customer over an expired 10% off coupon. Her humiliation wasn't a single event. It was now her 9-to-5 job. Eleonora stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city, a kingdom of glass and steel that she now helped command. "He really thought he was a wolf, you know," Eleonora mused more to herself than to Sophia. "He thought he was a predator, that he'd found this docile, gentle creature he could use and discard." "He was an idiot," Sophia said, joining her at the window. "He was," Eleonora agreed, a small final smile touching her lips. "He paraded his mistress at a gala, thinking it was his great arrival. He just He never understood. He wasn't a wolf. He was just a mouse. And he had wandered into a house of lions. That's the story of Andrew Blackwood, a man who thought he was a wolf among sheep, only to discover he was a mouse in a house of lions. He wanted a trophy wife, but dismissed the queen sitting at his table. He learned the hard way that in the world of real power, arrogance is a debt that always gets collected. Eleonora DeWitt didn't just win. She revealed that he was never even in the game. His attempt to humiliate her became his own public execution, a masterclass in consequences. What did you think of Andrew's downfall? Was it pure karma, or was Eleonora's plan just as cold-blooded? We read your comments and we love to hear your thoughts on these stories of justice. If you were on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. If you think a friend needs to hear this story, hit share. And if you want more dramatic real-life stories like this one, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming next.